If you open Mozilla's official blog at the time of writing, you'll be greeted with this, their top featured article called Improving Online Advertising Through Product and Infrastructure. This is a decidedly odd thing for Mozilla to choose as the first thing visitors should see about them when they're supposed to be the privacy-loving good guys of the internet. The article even directly opens on, quote, Mozilla is going to be more active in digital advertising, just in case the title didn't make things clear enough, and the author, as we can see, is none other than Mozilla's CEO, Laura Chambers. She became the CEO earlier this year, and this advertising push has clearly been her main focus so far. Of the 3 blog posts that she has written since she became CEO, one just describes some uninteresting organizational changes, while the other 2 are about advertising. You've already seen this one, while the other introduces Anonym, which is a digital advertising company that Mozilla bought under her leadership. An ad platform is the only thing that has been bought since she took over, and advertising is the only thing that she has chosen to blog about as well. She's clearly introducing a completely new direction for Mozilla, and while I personally don't love this direction, I also think it might be Mozilla's last choice left. Let me explain. This video was sponsored by Nebula. The common narrative around Mozilla is that they're basically doomed, and it's easy to see why. They make 86% of their revenue from Google paying them to be the default search engine in Firefox, while the market share of said Firefox has been declining more or less continuously for about 14 years now. Depending on a single deal that is tied to a single app that is declining in share is not a great place to be, but I actually looked through all the financial documents of the company and you kind of wouldn't tell by just looking at those. Revenues actually grew surprisingly fast until 2017 and have only more or less leveled off since, to the point where in 2022 they still made $600 million. That is way less than the giants, of course, and the growth has certainly slowed, but all of this looks far from the collapse that one might expect. Of course, most of that revenue was driven by what the company calls royalties, which is basically their deal with search engine providers. They started with Google, then in 2015 they switched to Yahoo for supposedly 5 years, but then Yahoo got sold to Verizon, which broke Mozilla's contract, so they switched back to Google after just 3 years. And fun fact, this spike in 2019 shows Verizon having to pay Mozilla a $338 million one-time fee for breaking their contract. Still, even without that, search revenues were actually fairly stable. Now, I find that somewhat counterintuitive, but I came up with 2 potential explanations. One, of course, Google likes having a competitor and likes being able to point at them and say, hey, we not only have a competitor, we're even paying them, so definitely we are not monopolists. But 2, Firefox's decline is less dramatic than I thought because, as it turns out, they do have a declining share of the browser market, but the browser market itself might be growing. They publish live analytics for their desktop browser, which has 165 million monthly active users now. That is only down 17% over 5 years. But meanwhile, the average user also spends 14% more time in Firefox, so search volume probably hasn't actually gone down a whole lot. In other words, it kinda makes sense for their search revenue to remain roughly the same. Better yet, here are their expenses, and you'll see that the organization has been profitable pretty much every year since they were founded, with margins typically hovering between a fairly healthy 10 and 40%. And since the Mozilla Foundation is a nonprofit, they have to keep their earnings instead of paying them out to investors as dividends, so they've even collected a very healthy pile of $1.3 billion in various forms of reserves. That is a very comfortable financial cushion, and just for context, they could keep all of their operations going for 3 full years without any changes, even if they suddenly stopped making money altogether. Not bad at all. And so actually our first takeaway should be that Mozilla is doing significantly better than most of us seem to think. The house is not on fire. Except if we look even closer, maybe it is. Google has just lost a big antitrust lawsuit in the US that specifically found that their search deals with companies like Mozilla and Apple were illegal. The court said that Google effectively has a search monopoly, and them paying for default placement therefore hurts other search engines. And while they haven't said what exact remedies they want from all of this, it's not unlikely to think that they'd simply stop Google from paying. That puts this whole part of Mozilla's revenue in jeopardy. Now, could another search engine like Bing or DuckDuckGo pay instead? We don't know, but even if they could, they'd probably pay a whole lot less with the obvious market leader now removed from the competition. Also, Firefox would then be stuck with a default search engine that most regular users find inferior, which would then potentially lead to even more of those regular users leaving them behind. So while we don't know the exact impact of this ruling yet, there is a realistic chance of it becoming an existential threat to Mozilla. This means that they urgently need to find a new source of revenue, which, to be honest, we've known for a long time now. It was always clear from the beginning that just relying on Google was a very risky proposition, but none of Mozilla's efforts so far have really worked. The company has historically explored three main options, and let's start with donations. In their first year of existence, almost all of their funding came from donations, and as an open source software maker, that's certainly not unexpected. They are, after all, one of the largest contributors to web standards worldwide. They are developing an open source browser with the only competing rendering engine to Google's Chromium and Apple's WebKit. Their tech powers many other critical projects like the Tor browser and so on, and so I think Mozilla is definitely generally worthy of public support. I have even donated to them a few times myself. The problem is that not many other people have. On Mozilla's revenue chart, you have to squint to see donations, or contributions as Mozilla calls them. Now, if I break these out on a separate chart, you might say that, hey, at least things are growing, but actually there's a catch. This part shows donations specifically to Thunderbird. That is the open source email and calendar client that Mozilla also happens to develop next to Firefox and the rest. Mozilla split that out into a sort of separate company within the group and told them to raise money themselves, which they have. Thunderbird is very much aimed at hardcore open source enthusiasts, and the fact that they managed to raise enough money from donations alone to pay for their operations is a good sign that, at least in this small niche, donations are a viable strategy. But this is a small team that can survive with just a handful of employees. Firefox and the rest of Mozilla need way more money, and they also need to have mainstream products beyond just their open source niche. The browser used to have pretty prominent calls for donation, but those have stopped, and correspondingly, donations for the rest of Mozilla have also declined. So I suppose they decided that these never really worked well enough, and they simply stopped asking. For context, the Firefox browser having 165 million users on the desktop means that Mozilla would need every single one of those, to donate somewhere between $3 to $4 a year for them to hit the same 600 million-ish revenue that they have right now. That is simply not realistic. People say they want free software that comes without tracking, without ads and everything else, but then outside of this little niche, very few people are actually willing to donate to make that happen. Okay, that brings us to subscriptions and advertising as our next two options. Looking at the revenue graphs again, Mozilla lumps all of these together, and breaking out the category into a separate graph, we can see that they started tracking this business in 2017. You might remember this being the year that Mozilla finally lost their deal with Yahoo and realized that they're basically stuck with Google forever, so this is clearly Mozilla's big push for diversification. They started by buying Pocket in 2017, which is a fairly well-loved web reader tool that you can save articles to and get recommendations from, and Mozilla monetized this both through a premium subscription and content. Then in 2019, they launched Mozilla VPN, which obviously lets them generate subscription revenue. And finally, Firefox also shows sponsored icons on the new tab page. This category overall has definitely grown and made 12.7% of their revenues by 2022. That's good, but still nowhere near enough to give them independence from Google. Now, I actually made a video 4 years ago, and I said that back then, Mozilla was finally starting to build a proper subscription business. They built Lockwise, a password manager, Firefox Send, a file transfer service, Firefox Hello, a video calling service, and a few more things. And all of this, I think, were supposed to turn into an ecosystem that Mozilla could eventually start charging money for. Sadly, only their VPN service survived and ended up making them any money. Now, I personally believe that a big privacy-focused subscription bundle was Mozilla's best chance at independence. Proton by now has proven pretty well that there is demand for an encrypted and private alternative to Gmail, Google Docs, Google Drive, a password manager, a VPN, etc. And Mozilla had the perfect privacy-focused brand to build this exact thing, but they didn't, which I blame in part on complacency and in part on something that I call the enthusiast trap. See, Mozilla built its whole brand around being the champion of free open source software that was fighting the evil corporate software giants like Microsoft. This gave them a strong core user base and even meant that a lot of open source contributors helped to maintain their software, often even for free. This was a huge advantage, but also a pretty big limitation because they were kind of chained to this user group and they couldn't do anything that upset them. For example, they tried launching ads in the new tab space already back in 2014, and people freaked out so much that Mozilla had to walk them back almost right away. Building a for-profit services empire, at least in the way that I imagined it, would have upset this group massively because it would have meant filling up Firefox and Thunderbird with ads for a first-party paid service, and probably also Mozilla spending a lot of money elsewhere on marketing. People even hate Microsoft and Google for doing that, who are for-profit giants, but Mozilla would have been crucified and roasted over a fire over this. This is what I call the enthusiast trap. When a company has a strong original core user base, which themselves are not very profitable, but then they also keep the company from transitioning to a new strategy that might work for them, but then that strategy might actually betray the core original users, so this just doesn't work. Now, management in a position like this should realize that their only chance for survival long-term is to pivot anyway, but Mozilla's managers saw increasing revenues even as their browser market share shrank, so I bet they just stuck their head in the sand and hoped for the best. Only in 2017, when they lost Yahoo, did they feel a little bit of pressure, but at that point their market share was significantly diminished and Proton had already beaten them to much of this, and only now with the Google ruling actually looming over them for real do they feel enough pressure to start something radical. Which finally takes us to a new CEO and advertising, something actually radical. Since 2022, 3 things have been announced that are relevant for our video. 1. Mozilla bought FakeSpot, a tool for spotting fake reviews and getting coupons with discounts as you shop online. 2. The company launched Solo AI, which is a new website builder that is focused on generating a website super easily. And 3. They bought Anonym, a new online ad platform founded by ex-Meta employees that claims to be a privacy-preserving ad platform. What else? I've left a bunch of links to some materials in the description if you want to read up on how this actually works, but it's extremely boring and complicated, so I'll just give you a dumbed-down explanation. They claim that they can create encrypted black boxes on some server which raw, sensitive advertising data can flow into. There, they then do a whole bunch of processing inside of this black box, like figuring out who clicked on what, and they spit out anonymized results at the end, after which they then destroy the black box. So the claim is that you still see ads and you're still being tracked to some degree, but that is supposedly okay because now it's a neutral computer doing all of this, and neither Mozilla nor the advertisers actually end up knowing much about you at all, but they can still somehow target ads at you and track if they're working. Anonym is expected to power ads inside FakeSpot, Pocket, Firefox itself, and my guess is that it will also show up on websites built with Solo AI. Plus, while they're testing all of this out internally right now, they actually want it to become an industry-wide platform, meaning that Mozilla wants to build an ad business that grows far beyond Firefox. Now, will the privacy claims hold up? Will any advertisers actually want to use this ad platform? We don't know, but the one thing we do know that, of course, the core users of Mozilla do not like this at all. They don't want to see ads or be tracked in the first place. The CEO admits that, quote, "We know that not everyone in our community will embrace our entrance into this market." And yet, she clearly finally decided that upsetting some of their core audience might be better than doing basically nothing and continuing to shrink into irrelevance. I would have preferred a subscription business, but let's see if her plan actually works. Now, I firmly believe that if we want to have an internet that is not completely overrun by weird trackers, advertising, AI spam bot, etc., then we first have to build it, and we also have to pay a fair price for it, which is a big reason why I and a bunch of my creator friends have built Nebula. Nebula is our very own independent creator-owned streaming platform that specializes in thoughtful content. No ads, no AI slop, only high-quality videos from hundreds of the smartest educational creators online. This includes our regular videos, often early access. I typically also answer a viewer question after every video. Like this week, I'll be talking about my thoughts on Manifest v3 and the Arc browser. And Nebula also features loads of high-quality originals like Wendover's Jetlag, Real History's Red Atom, or my very own Technorama. Now, you might say that, hey, paywalls are not great for the open web either. But to that I say, we now have guest passes. That's right, if you are a Nebula subscriber, you can now invite a friend to watch Nebula for free for a whole week. Smooth. Nebula is what I think video streaming can be in its best form, and it's available on just about any phone, computer, or smart TV that you own. And the business model is super simple too. We unapologetically charge a subscription fee, and that funds the platform and also helps us create more and better content for you. That's it. With my link, go.nebula.tv/TechAltar, which you can also find in the description or scan the QR code for, you will even get a 40% discount that brings the service down to just $3 a month or $36 a year. That is extremely fair, I think, so be sure to use my link for the discount and to let Nebula know that I sent you. Oh, and if you just absolutely hate subscriptions, we even offer a one-time payment that gives you lifetime access. We thought of everything. I hope you enjoy Nebula, and I'll see you over there.